He had no choice. They both looked at the sleeping dog, even in rest. Rufus' face showed signs of his ordeal, scars that hadn't been there before, a chunk missing from one ear, that terrible wound on his head, still raw despite the vet's treatment. "What happened out there, boy?" Elizabeth whispered. "Where's my son?" Rufus's eyes opened slightly at the sound of her voice, tail giving a single weak thump before he drifted back to sleep. "The bandage means someone helped him," Neil said firmly. "Someone, somewhere, knows something. The police just need to look harder. Accidents happen. Neil's even too experienced people. Remember that park ranger last year who don't Neil spun to face her. Don't compare Dean to some random hiker. He knew those woods better than anyone. He'd been hunting there since he was 12, and he'd never ever put Josley in danger. I know that, do you? Because you're sitting there listening to that detective's theories like they mean something, like Dean and Jocelyn. Just what fell off a cliff, got eaten by bears, with no trace." Elizabeth flinched at the harsh images. The search teams gave up after 3 months, just like they're giving up now. Niels ran his hands through his hair in frustration. They see Rufus and think, oh, the dog survived in the wild for 2 years. The humans must be dead. But what about the bandage, Mum? What about the fact that Rufus made it home at all? He wouldn't leave Dean unless something forced him to, or unless Dean told him to, Elizabeth said quietly. That stopped Neil's mid-pace. They both looked at Rufus, still sleeping fitfully on his bed. "You think Dean sent him for help?" Niels's voice had dropped. "I don't know what to think anymore." Elizabeth's shoulders sagged. "I want to believe they're alive, God knows. I do, but 2 years, Niels, no ransom demands, no bodies, no camps, no signs. Maybe the police are right. Maybe the police are right. Maybe something terrible happened and Rufus was the only survivor. No, Neil." Jaw set in a way that reminded Elizabeth painfully of his father. "I'm not accepting that, not without proof." He strode toward the hallway leading to the garage. Elizabeth heard him rummaging round, metal clanking against metal. "What are you doing?" Niels emerged carrying his hunting rifle and Dean's old camping pack.
"What?"
"I should have done better 2 years ago. I'm going back out there, Niels. It's getting dark." "No, I've got lights and camping gear." He was already checking the rifle, loading ammunition into his pockets. "I searched for weeks after they disappeared, but maybe I missed something. Maybe things have changed. If Rufus found his way back now, after all this time, something made that happen. The police are searching. The police are going through the motions. They've already decided. Dean and Jocelyn are dead." He pulled out a tent, sleeping bag, water, purification tablets. "I haven't." Elizabeth stood her arthritic knees, protesting. "At least wait until morning. Go with the search teams, so they can tell me where I can and can't look." "No thanks." He found Dean's GPS unit, checked the batteries. "I'll start where they went missing and work outward. Different patterns than last time, if someone helped Rufus. There might be cabins or camps we missed." "Niels, please, I can't lose you too." He paused, then seeing the fear in his mother's eyes, his expression softened slightly. "You won't. I'll check in by satellite phone every 12 hours, but I have to do this. Mum, I can't just sit here while they write." Dean, off. Elizabeth knew that determined look. She'd seen it in his father, in Dean, and now in Niels. There would be no talking him out of this. "Be careful," she whispered. "I will." He hugged her briefly, then headed for the door. "Take care of Rufus. Maybe when he's stronger, he'll be able to show us something." The police said the trail went cold. The police followed one trail. Rufus might have taken different routes over 2 years. There could be other signs. He shouldered the pack, rifle in hand. "I'll find something, Mum. Whatever happened out there, I'll find the truth." Elizabeth watched from the doorway as Niels loaded his truck, every movement sharp with purpose. She wanted to stop him, to keep her remaining son safe, but she understood his need to act. The not knowing was its own kind of torture. As the truck's taillights disappeared into the gathering darkness. Elizabeth closed the door and returned to Rufus's side. The dog's eyes were open now, watching her with an ancient sadness. He's going to look for them, she told the dog unnecessarily, just like you did. I suppose, Rufus wed softly, his gaze moving to the door, as if he too was watching Niels leave. Elizabeth settled into her chair, one hand resting on the dog's head. Whatever secrets those woods held, she prayed they would finally give them up. The house felt too quiet with Niels gone. Elizabeth sat in her armchair beside Rufus's bed, the only sounds the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the dog's labored breathing. It was past 10 o'clock. Now the window's dark mirrors reflecting the warm lamplight of the living room. Do you remember all those Sunday dinners, you under the table hoping for scraps? Jocelyn always snuck you pieces of roast when she thought I wasn't looking, her voice caught. I miss them so much. I keep wondering, will I ever see my boy again? Will he walk through that door like you did? She knew she was being maudlin, talking to a dog about her fears, but who else was there? Niels was. Out in those dark woods, chasing shadows, and hope. Her arthritis was too bad tonight to call her sister in Florida. Holding the phone that long would be agony, so she sat with Rufus, 2 survivors, keeping vigil together. The police think they're gone, she whispered. They think you lived wild all this time, that Dean and Jocelyn had an accident, but you wouldn't leave him, would you not? Unless you had to, not unless he told you to go. A sharp knock at the door shattered the quiet. Elizabeth's heart leaped. Niels must have changed his mind, decided to wait until morning. After all, she pushed herself up from the chair joints, protesting, and shuffled to the front door. Through the peephole she was surprised to see Officer Volkov standing on her porch, his uniform crisp. Despite the late hour, he was holding what looked like a manila folder. Elizabeth opened the door partway. Officer Volkov, it's rather late. I apologize, Mrs. Spence, he said, and he did look genuinely apologetic. I know it's after 10, but I've been going through old case files at the station, cross-referencing some of Dean's DEA work with missing persons reports from the last few years. I think I might have found something, a lead possibly. There are some connections I'd like to show you, get your input on. I was going to wait until morning, but I saw your lights were still on, and I thought you'd want to know immediately if there was any new information. Of course, yes. Come in. The moment she began, opening the door wider, Rufus exploded into a frenzy of barking. Despite his weakened state, he struggled to his feet, lips pulled back in a snarl, his focus laser-sharp on Officer Volkov. Rufus. No exclamation mark. Elizabeth turned back to the dog, shocked by the intensity of his reaction. Stop that. But Rufus continued his aggressive display, actually trying to lunge forward despite his injuries. His barking was so loud, it hurt Elizabeth's ears. I'm so sorry, she said to Volkov, who had taken a step back from the doorway. I don't know what's gotten into him. Ever since he came back, he's been acting so strange. It's all right, Vulov said, though Elizabeth noticed he kept his hand near his service weapon. Trauma can change an animal's behavior significantly. Let me put him in his crate. Just give me a moment. It took considerable effort to get Rufus into the large wire crate they kept in the corner of the living room. He fought her the whole way, something he'd never done before, and continued barking even after she'd latched the door. Hush, now, she said firmly. That's enough. Officer Vulov is trying to help us. She returned to the front door, embarrassed and flustered. I'm so sorry about that. Please come in. Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot. That would be wonderful. Thank you. Volkov stepped inside, his eyes immediately scanning the living room. It must be difficult being here alone with everything that's happened. Niels was here earlier, but he's gone to search the woods himself. Couldn't wait for morning. Elizabeth led the way toward the kitchen, noting that Rufus' barking had shifted to a low, continuous growl. He's convinced the police aren't doing enough. Family often feels that way. Volkov said, following her. It's natural to want to take action, to feel like you're doing something. Yes. I suppose so. Now you said you found some connections in old files. I did some very interesting patterns that might explain. Elizabeth had just turned to ask him to have a seat at the kitchen table when she felt something soft press against her face. The sharp chemical smell hit her nostrils. A split second before she understood what was happening, a cloth over her mouth and nose. Chloroform her mind supplied uselessly as she tried to struggle, but Vulov was stronger, younger, and had the element of surprise, one arm wrapped around her waist holding her against him, while the other kept the cloth firmly in place. Elizabeth's arthritic hands clawed weakly at his arm, but already the edges of her vision were going dark. I'm sorry about this, she heard him say, his voice sounding very far away, but your son made this necessary. Her legs gave out the kitchen, tilted sideways through the growing darkness she could hear Rufus going absolutely wild in his crate, barking and snarling and throwing himself against the wire walls. He tried to warn me. She thought muzzily. He knew he tried to tell me. The last thing she heard before the darkness claimed her completely was Rufus. Desperate barking and the sound of her body hitting the kitchen floor. Consciousness returned slowly, bringing with it a pounding headache and the taste of chemicals in her mouth. Elizabeth's eyes fluttered open to harsh fluorescent lighting and concrete. She was sitting on a cold floor, her back against something hard. When she tried to move, she realized her hands were bound behind her. Ah, you're awake. Officer Vulov stood a few feet away, no longer the helpful, concerned officer from before. His uniform was gone, replaced by dark civilian clothes. The friendly mask had dropped entirely, revealing cold calculation in those blue eyes. Why? Elizabeth's voice came out as a croak. Why are you doing this? Because your son couldn't leave well enough alone, Vulov replied matter-of-factly. He had to play hero, had to send that damn dog for help. Elizabeth's mind struggled to process this. You mean Dean is alive for now? Volkov pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, though that may change depending on how cooperative everyone decides to be. Two men entered through a metal door. Elizabeth hadn't noticed they were large, rough-looking, with a kind of faces that had seen violence and hadn't minded it. They spoke rapidly to Vulov in what Elizabeth recognized as Russian. Though she couldn't understand the words, their tone was angry. Aggressive. Vulov responded in the same language, gesturing toward Elizabeth. One of the men spat on the floor and said something that sounded like a curse. Get her up, Vulov said in English. Time for a family reunion. The two men hauled Elizabeth to her feet, ignoring her gasp of pain as her arthritic joints protested. Her shoulders screamed as they half-dragged her through the warehouse. She tried to take in details: metal shelving, shipping containers, the smell of motor oil and rust. They were somewhere industrial, but she had no idea where. They passed through another door into a connected warehouse space. This one was darker, with only a few overhead bulbs providing dim illumination. Volkov led them to what looked like a storage room that had been walled off with plywood, creating a crude cell. He produced a key and unlocked a padlock on the door. Your son has been our guest for quite some time, Mrs. Spence. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to see you. The door swung open, and Elizabeth's knees nearly buckled. There, in the corner of the small room, was a figure that barely resembled her son. Dean was skeletal, his once strong frame reduced to skin stretched over bones. His hair was long and matted, his beard unkempt. He was secured to a support pole with heavy chains lying on a filthy mattress. His clothes, if they could still be called that, were rags, but it was his eyes that broke her heart. Those familiar brown eyes, so like his father's, now hollow and haunted. One of the criminals walked over and kicked the pole hard, the metallic clang echoing through the space. Dean jerked awake, instinctively trying to curl into himself before he saw who stood before him. Mum, His voice was barely a whisper, disbelief and horror warring on his gaunt face. No, no, no. Dean Elizabeth tried to move toward him, but the men held her back. You see what happens when you make foolish decisions, one of the criminals said in heavily accented English. You send dog for help now. Your mother pays price. To Dean struggled against his chains, what little strength he had left, going into the futile effort. Please don't hurt her. She has nothing to do with this, I'll tell you. Whatever you want, give you whatever information you already gave us, everything useful. Volkov interrupted. Your mother is here. Because you couldn't just accept your situation, you had to try to be clever sending that mud away. Please. Dean's voice broke. She's 72 years old. She has arthritis. She needs medication. You can't. We can do whatever we want, the second criminal said. You should have thought of consequences before. Elizabeth finally found her voice. Dean, where's Jocelyn? The look that crossed her son's face told her everything. His eyes filled with tears, and he shook his head slowly. I'm sorry, Mom. Dean whispered. I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. Touching, Vulov said dryly, but we don't have time for reunions. Come. They dragged Elizabeth back out of the room, Dean's desperate pleas following them. Mum, I'm sorry. Don't hurt her, please. The heavy door slammed shut, cutting off his voice. The criminals spoke again in Russian, gesturing and appearing to argue about something. Finally, Vulov nodded and turned to Elizabeth. You'll be kept separately. Can't have you two plotting together. They took her to another part of the warehouse too. A shipping container that had been modified into another makeshift cell. Inside was nothing but a pole fixed to the floor. Vulov produced zip ties and secured her to it, the position immediately sending fire through her arthritic joints. Please, Elizabeth gasped. I need something to sit on properly, a mattress, a cushion, anything. My arthritis, not my problem. Vulov said coldly. Your son shouldn't have sent the dog for help if he cared about your comfort. How long? Elizabeth managed. How long have you had him? Volkov paused at the container door. 2 years, give or take. Your son has been very useful to our operations. De-intelligence is quite valuable in certain circles. You forced him to give you information. Forced is such an ugly word. Let's say we provided proper motivation, first with his wife, then with the dog. He was much more cooperative after we showed him what happens to those who resist. The implications hit Elizabeth like a physical blow. Joe's line was dead. They'd tortured Dean for 2 years, used his loved ones against him. You're a police officer, she said, though it sounded foolish even to her. I'm a businessman. Vulov corrected. Being a police officer just provides excellent cover and access now. I have things to attend to. Try to get comfortable, Mrs. Spence. You'll be here for a while, officer. Volkov had his hand on the container door. When he froze, the sound was unmistakable. Multiple vehicles approaching, fast tires crunching on gravel. His hand flew to the radio. On his belt, he spoke rapidly in Russian, his voice tight with urgency. The response that crackled back was panicked. The voice on the other end, shouting even without understanding the language. Elizabeth could hear the fear through the thin walls of the container. She heard car doors slamming, many of them, then a voice she recognized, Detective Walsh on a megaphone. This is the police. We have the building surrounded. Come out with your hands up. Vulov spun back to Elizabeth, his face twisted with rage. He pulled out his service weapon, a Glock that looked impossibly large and black in the dim light. Your son brought this on you, he snarled, rushing back to her. All of this is his fault. He grabbed the zip ties, holding her to the pole, cutting them roughly with a knife. Elizabeth cried out as her arthritic wrists held in one position too long, screamed in protest. But Vulov didn't care. He hauled her to her feet, spun her around, and pressed the gun to her temple. Move, he ordered, using her as a shield as he pushed her toward the container door. Outside the container, the warehouse had erupted into Chaos. Elizabeth could hear the Russians shouting to each other, the scrape of crates being pushed into defensive positions. Someone was yelling orders in accented English. Folk dragged her through the warehouse, keeping her body between him and the main entrance. Elizabeth's legs shook, her joints on fire, but the gun at her head kept her moving. "This is your last warning, Detective." Walsh's voice boomed through the megaphone. "Release any hostages and surrender peacefully." The response was a burst of automatic weapons fire from somewhere near the main entrance. The warehouse erupted. Elizabeth heard glass shattering, bullets punching through the metal walls with sharp pinging sounds. "SWAT is breaching." Someone shouted an explosion, a flashbang grenade. Elizabeth's ears rang more gunfire, the sharp crack of police weapons mixing with the deeper chatter of automatic rifles. Volkov cursed and pushed her faster, trying to navigate through the maze of containers and shelving they were passing under a wooden support beam, when a stray bullet struck it, showering them both with splinters. Vulov instinctively ducked his grip on Elizabeth, loosening for just a moment. It was enough. Elizabeth wrenched herself sideways, her body protesting, but adrenaline giving her strength she didn't know she still had. She stumbled, fell, and rolled behind a forklift. "Damn it!" Vulov shouted. He looked between her and his escape route, made a split-second decision, and ran. Elizabeth lay gasping behind the forklift, splinters in her hair, her whole body shaking. The gunfire was intensifying. She could hear officers shouting, "Move, move, move," and contact left. Dean. She had to get to Dean. Fighting through the pain, she began crawling across the concrete floor. Her knees screamed. Her hands were bleeding from the rough surface, but she kept going. The plywood-walled cell wasn't far. She could see it through the chaos. That makeshift corner room where her son was chained. More gunfire erupted near what sounded like a back entrance. Someone was screaming in. Russian glass crashed. A flashbang went off somewhere to her right, the concussion making her ears ring worse. She reached the corner, crawled around it. The padlock was still off from when they'd brought her to see Dean. She pushed the door open. Dean was there, trying to sit up on his filthy mattress, chains clanking. His hollow eyes widened when he saw her mom. "Get down," he whispered urgently. "Get behind something solid." Elizabeth crawled to him, staying low. More gunfire erupted closer. Now she could hear the SWAT team's tactical commands. "Drop your weapons, hands behind your back." The commands were in English now, directed at someone nearby. Russian voices yelled back defiantly. 3 quick gunshots, the controlled fire of trained police officers, then 2 more. Someone started screaming in Russian, the sound full of pain and fear. Another shot cut it short, then suddenly silence, the kind that rings in your ears after chaos. Elizabeth reached Dean, her arthritic joints burning from the crawl across